I was standing on the stone courtyard of the Caldwell seaside estate, what people like to call the wedding paradise of the San Juan Islands, when the coordinator's voice floated toward me like a verdict being read aloud. You'll be seated in row 12, right next to the service area. The color palette here is very refined, so we need everything to look harmonious. Beside her, Sienna, my soon-to-be daughter-in-law, smiled a smile so cold the ocean breeze seemed to step aside for it. Mother Monroe, she said softly, light as a feather but sharp as a broken shell. That wool coat clashes with the wedding concept. Sitting farther back will be safer for the family image. Andrew, my only son, the boy I raised for 36 years on a teacher's salary, stood between us, silent. No objection, no kindness. Not even a flicker of recognition. He lowered his head as if ashamed of the woman who brought him into the world, with waves brushing the rocks below and the laughter of prestigious guests rising into the salt air. I, the groom's mother, was assigned a seat behind the camera crew and the cable runners, in the exact spot where they usually placed the lemonade trays. I wrapped my fingers around the sparkling cider they handed me. My hands shook so hard, I thought the glass might slip onto the stone at any second. 15 years of widowhood, a lifetime of teaching in Ballard, 4 decades raising one son, and my worth, on the most important day of his life, had been reduced to a chair tucked behind the staff rotation area. I didn't cry, not because it didn't hurt, but because I was too familiar with being the one people assumed could endure just a little more. So I lifted my chin and walked toward the last row, like someone stepping across the rawest humiliation of her life. And the moment I sat down, the chair beside mine shifted. A warm hand rested on my hand. Just pretend we arrived together. I turned. Sitting beside me was a man with silver hair, a charcoal-tailored suit, and eyes the color of the ocean after rain. A faint sandalwood scent drifted between us as he leaned in just enough for only me to hear. "Trust me," he murmured. "They no longer know where to put you in this picture." My pulse stopped, breath caught. Guests began turning around. Their expressions shifted pity to curiosity to something that looked a lot like caution. A woman in a feathered fascinator whispered, "Who is he? He looks powerful." I didn't understand what was happening. I only knew the balance of the room had changed, not because of me, but because of this man who appeared out of nowhere. Andrew looked back, his face drained, as if he had never imagined his mother sitting beside someone who didn't fit the small box he'd put her in for years. Sienna looked too. Something flickered in her eyes. Something I used to see in students when they realized their test score wasn't what they expected. Loss of control. I tilted my head and whispered, "I don't understand what's going on." "Just smile," he said. "Your son is looking again." So I did, and in that moment, when Andrew's gaze passed over us once more, I saw his expression falter, astonishment mixed with fear, like a boy suddenly realizing the mother he pushed into a corner had become something outside his calculations. The man gently squeezed my hand. "Perfect," he said. "Now they can't push you out. They can't place you in row 12 like an afterthought." I stared at him, grateful and confused. "Who are you?" He turned slightly, the afternoon light skimming across his silver hair. His eyes were deep, familiar, so familiar my lungs tightened. "The man you lost far too long ago, Clara." My mouth opened, but no sound came out. The music, the chatter, the surf, all faded, leaving only that face, the face of the 18-year-old who once read poetry with me at the Bainbridge ferry dock. The boy I thought I had lost forever. Elias. Elias Stone. First love, first heartbreak, and now, here beside me. As though the part of my life that disappeared 50 years ago had found its way back. I didn't know what was coming next. Didn't know why he appeared on the day I was placed in the last row. But I knew one thing. The moment his hand covered mine, I was no longer the woman who swallowed humiliation and sat quietly in the shadows. And if you're still here with me, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is a stepping stone on this journey of mine. And if this opening touched something in you, hit like and subscribe so more people can see that no one deserves to be pushed to the last row of their own life. My name is Clara Monroe. I'm 68 years old, and this is the story of the day I stood up from row 12, the place they thought I'd stay forever. Elias kept his hand over mine until the applause rose, signaling the ceremony had ended. I saw his face more clearly under the slanting light falling from the western shore silver hair, but the bridge of his nose, still strong like when he was 18. Eyes deep and still like Crescent Lake in late autumn, and the faintest smile, soft and sad, one of those smiles that makes you believe every scrape life ever gave you might someday heal. A tight wave of emotion pushed up my throat. After all these years, I never thought I would see Elias Stone again. Not in Seattle, not in the San Juan Islands, and certainly not on the very day my future daughter-in-law pushed me to the back row like a misplaced object. "Walk with me for a bit," Elias said, rising before I could react. "It's a little loud here." I noticed Andrew look down, uneasy. Sienna didn't bother to hide her irritation. She was used to controlling every detail within her reach, including me, and Elias was the one variable she hadn't calculated. I stood. He offered his hand. I placed mine into it. We walked away from the ceremony space, down stone paths running along the water's edge. The breeze carried salt, damp wood, and the fading scent of roses left wilting after the vows. I caught our reflection in the glass wall of the reception hall, a worn wool coat on an aging woman, beside a man in a bespoke suit. The image didn't make sense, yet somehow, it felt right. In its own strange way. "Elias, why are you here?" I asked, trying to sound composed. He smiled. "I live part-time on the island. I have a small place on the far side. One of Caldwell's partner companies invited me to the wedding. I wasn't going to come, but when I saw the name Andrew Monroe on the guest list, something pushed me to." I stopped in my tracks. "You know my son?" Elias looked directly at me, and in that moment I knew. He had always watched from afar, even after we lost each other. "Clara," he said softly, "I never truly forgot you, and because I didn't forget, sometimes I know more about your life than you think." I turned away, hiding eyes that were beginning to sting. We followed a narrow turn leading down to a small garden behind the estate. There, white lilies bloomed, the very flower I once loved so much I wrote about it in my teenage journals. "Still like lilies?" Elias asked. I touched a petal. I thought I'd forgotten. "No, you were only forced to forget." His words landed like a knock to the chest. We sat on a wooden bench facing the sea. Waves beat against the rocks, steady as a heartbeat buried somewhere deep inside a ribcage. "There's so much I want to ask you," Elias said, "but first, let me tell my part." I didn't speak, I just listened. "After I left for school in Vancouver," he began, "I wrote you nearly 40 letters. I called you from a payphone near campus. I thought we would still be us." My hands tightened against my knees, each word slicing through the layers of memory I had forced shut. "But," Elias continued, "every letter came back. The phone line was always busy. Then one day, I returned, and you were gone. The neighbors said you'd moved suddenly. Your mother said you wanted a new life. And then I saw your wedding picture in the newspaper." I heard something break in my chest. Not something breaking now, something that had broken long ago, and today finally had a name. "My mother," I whispered. "She didn't like you. She thought you were unstable. She controlled everything. I didn't know you'd written. I didn't know you'd come back." Elias nodded slowly, as if he had always suspected the truth, but never let himself believe it. "I guessed as much," he said, "because if it were the Clara I knew, you wouldn't have vanished from me like that." The wind cooled, the taste of salt settled on my skin. "Were you happy?" Elias asked. "Afterwards?" I smiled, small, warm, and aching. "I loved Mark," I said. "He was a good man, a kind man. But he never looked at me the way you're looking at me now." Elias said nothing. His silence made me feel seen, really seen. "And you?" I asked quietly. Did you Love anyone else? He shook his head, a small, truthful shake. I thought I would, but no one was you. I looked down at my hands, now marked with age spots and time. I never imagined that after half a century, someone would still hold a place for me in their heart. And I never imagined that at the very moment I was pushed to the last row like something unworthy of notice, someone would still see me as something unforgettable. Clara, Elias said, what they did to you today, that wasn't your failure. It was their choice. And you deserve more. You always have. It was the first sentence in years that made me want to cry. I didn't, but something in me loosened. From the distance, music from the wedding drifted back, blending with the surf and the wind threading through the lilies. A strange mix of cruelty and gentleness, of what had just been lost and what had just returned. I drew a deep breath. Elias, why did you sit beside me this afternoon? He looked at me, straight and steady. Because I recognized you instantly, he said. And because I saw them putting you somewhere you didn't belong. I laughed softly. I didn't think I belonged anywhere anymore. No, Elias replied. You don't belong to row 12, and you never belong to the darkness others built around you. The wind pulled at the hem of my coat. I stood, not because I needed to leave, but because I needed air. In the distance, I saw Andrew and Sienna searching for us. But this time, the fear of being confronted didn't make me want to hide. For the first time in years, I felt like I could step into the light without asking anyone's permission. My life, some part of it had just begun to return. Andrew and Sienna appeared at the top of the path just as Elias and I turned back. The sun had already slipped away, leaving only a strip of cold blue light stretched across the shoreline thin, fading and trembling like the last moments of the day. The wind brushed through the lilies, making them shiver like a fear no one had named yet. Mom! Andrew called, his face slightly pale, trying to keep his voice steady, but I heard the strain underneath. Sienna didn't bother masking her irritation. Her heels struck the stone path sharply, as if every step was meant to assert dominance. She looked Elias up and down, then glanced at me, her eyes full of questions and annoyance. We need to talk, Sienna said. Her tone wasn't blatantly rude, but sharp enough to make a timid person shrink. I didn't shrink. Elias stood beside me, his hand close to mine but not touching, like he knew I needed presence, not protection. I think, Elias said calmly, Clara has endured enough disrespect for one family event. If there's going to be a conversation, it should be a proper one. Andrew turned quickly toward him. Who are you? Exactly. Before Elias could speak, Sienna cut in, her voice crisp as ice. Andrew, he's clearly not on the guest list. This is a private space for the Caldwell and Monroe families. Mom, excuse me, Mrs. Monroe left without informing anyone. This is inappropriate. Mrs. Monroe, not Mom, not Mother, not even Mama, a title that sounded like a stranger intruding where she didn't belong. I looked straight at Sienna. What you call me is your choice, I said softly, no raised voice, no tremor. But I didn't leave. I was placed in the last row, so I stood up. Sienna's eyes stalled. Andrew swallowed hard. Elias said nothing, but I felt the steadiness radiating from him, like the lingering warmth after sunset. I turned to Andrew. What's going on? I asked. Andrew exhaled, guilt showing through. Mom, we were looking for you. The photographers are waiting for family photos. Sienna nodded, a tight smile on her lips. Exactly. We prepared a layout for the pictures. You'll stand to Andrew's left, slightly behind, to balance the framing. I heard what she meant. Stand back so I wouldn't ruin their aesthetic. Don't stand out. Don't let the old coat show. Don't disturb the glossy symmetry of the Caldwells. I opened my mouth to respond, but Elias spoke first, his voice low, not loud, but strong enough to make the sea breeze pause. If she has to stand slightly behind, then someone here is worried about something far more fragile than a photograph. Sienna flushed. Are you implying something? Elias only smiled, the kind of smile of a man who has dealt with 100 Sienna types in his lifetime and never once been rattled. Not implying anything, he said, just observing. Andrew bit his lip, then looked at me. Mom, please, we just want one nice family photo. I looked at my son, the same boy I once held after every nightmare. The boy who handed me a fistful of seashells from Alki Beach and said, Mom, I want to keep the pretty things to give to you. Where did that boy go? I saw shades of Mark in him, gentle, easily swayed, easily led. But I also saw something Mark never had, fear of losing standing beside a woman as forceful as Sienna. I placed a hand over my chest, feeling my heartbeat steady itself. Andrew, I said slowly, a photo won't be a family photo if it's taken just to hide the shame you think I bring. Andrew went pale. Sienna opened her mouth, ready to snap back, but Elias tilted his head slightly, as if to signal that I was standing exactly where I needed to be. I continued. You know, Andrew, when your father was alive, he always said, family is where everyone has a place, not where someone has to stand lower so others look better. I saw my son's eyes tremble. A long silence followed. The wind picked up, bringing the tang of seaweed and salt. The dusk reddened into the water like a streak of spilled wine. Then Andrew let out a breath. Mom, I'm sorry, I just didn't want to make things difficult. I was afraid Sienna would be upset if I wasn't classy enough, I asked plainly. Andrew didn't answer, but that was the answer. Sienna tightened her grip on his arm, tugging softly as if to end the discussion. We should return. Dinner is starting soon. Guests are waiting. Elias slid his hands into his coat pockets, his stance that of a man who had stood before courts, boards, and titans his entire life and lost his fear somewhere long ago. I don't think she needs to return to a place where she was treated like an afterthought, Elias said, his tone so cold the wind held still. And she certainly doesn't need to sit in the back again just to please a young woman who doesn't understand respect. Sienna spun around. Who are you to... The only one here who remembers Clara Monroe exactly as she is, Elias replied. His voice was like surf against rock, not loud, but strong enough to split something open. I touched Elias's sleeve lightly, signaling him to pause. I didn't want this to become a battlefield at the edge of the sea. Elias, I said quietly, let me. He nodded, stepping back half a pace, but still beside me. I looked at Sienna, then at Andrew. I will return, I said. Not because I want to, but because I am the groom's mother, and mothers don't abandon their sons on important days. I saw Andrew's shoulders drop, relief washing over him. But, I continued, when we take the photo, I will stand at the same level, not behind. Sienna frowned. Clara, That is my place, I said, soft but firm. And I won't stand anywhere else. A pause. Andrew nodded first. Okay, Mom. I understand. Sienna looked at him, then at me, then at Elias, and finally realized there was no other move left. Fine, she said, lips tight. Equal. I turned to Elias. Will you come with me? Elias smiled. I sat beside you once. I can stand beside you again. We walked back up the stone path toward the wedding site as the evening light stretched into a soft orange veil across the island. The wind swept through my hair, but this time, I didn't lower my head. Maybe I wasn't the woman of row 12 anymore. Maybe, at last, I was returning to the place I had lost long ago, the place where I belonged. When we returned to the reception area, the golden lights had been turned on along the tree line by the shore, reflecting across the water and making the entire estate look like a ballroom suspended in the air. From a distance, the dinner tables shimmered like small illuminated boats floating across a night lake. The clinking of silverware, the laughter of guests, the early call of seagulls, everything blended into a sound that felt warm and strange at the same time. But the moment I stepped in, I felt it clearly. The atmosphere had changed. The people who hadn't bothered to look at me earlier, women draped in pearls, business magnates from Seattle, now turned their faces toward me, their eyes no longer pitying or curious, but cautious. I knew why. They saw Elias. And a man like Elias Stone standing beside a retired schoolteacher like me disrupted the category they had put me in. It left them unsure which box to place me in now. I heard whispers. Who is he? He looks familiar. Wasn't he in an article about clean energy investment? Why is he with the groom's mother? I heard every word, but for the first time in years, I did not lower my head under other people's eyes. Elias walked slowly, not flaunting, not rushing, but his presence was enough for the servers to step aside, enough for a few VIP guests to stop speaking in mid-sentence. When we reached the wedding photo display, Andrew approached, his expression softer now that Sienna wasn't beside him. "Mom," he said quietly, "the photographer is ready." I nodded. Sienna stood a few steps away, retouching her makeup. When she saw us, her lips hesitated for a split second, but she quickly rearranged herself into the perfect composure of someone who knows they're being watched. The photos began. The photographer, young, likely from Seattle, looked around as if searching for someone missing. Then his eyes landed on Elias. "Sir, would you like to stand next to Mrs. Monroe?" he asked, cautious. Sienna opened her mouth to object, but Andrew answered quickly. "Yes, standing next to Mom is fine." I glanced at Andrew, and in that moment I realized there were burdens my son had been carrying alone. It wasn't that I didn't understand, but understanding didn't mean excusing. Elias stood beside me. He adjusted my shawl gently, like someone who'd done it 30 years before. The flash burst, then again, then again. Each time the white light hit our faces, I didn't see the invisible walls people had built around me anymore. I saw an equal place, and my presence in it. When the photographer finally said, "We're done," the crowd flowed toward the dinner tables. A soft waltz played. The host invited everyone to take their seats. I was about to step forward when a hand brushed my sleeve lightly. An older woman, hair silver and softly curled, eyes warm but sharp. "You're the groom's mother?" she asked. "Yes," I smiled. "I saw where they seated you earlier." She shook her head in a refined way. "Quite disrespectful, but you stood beautifully, with dignity." I pressed my lips together gently. "Thank you." She touched her chest lightly. "My name is Rachel Lim. I worked with Elias Stone many years ago. He doesn't usually appear with anyone. I'm glad to see him standing beside you." I froze. "You mean?" "He's not the type of man who lets a past return just to disturb him," Rachel said. "If he returned, it means that past never disappeared." I didn't respond. My throat tightened. Rachel smiled, placing a hand on mine. "Clara, people like us are often underestimated, but sometimes all it takes is one person standing beside us at the right moment, and the order of the whole room changes." She walked away before I could answer. I hadn't taken another step when a soft but firm voice sounded behind me. "Mom." "Sienna." I turned. She approached alone, holding a glass of white wine, makeup flawless, but her eyes carried the slightest tremor. "Mom, I mean, Mrs. Monroe," she began, trying to sound composed. "I wanted to apologize for the seating earlier." I looked straight at her. "Apologize for what?" Sienna squeezed her glass so tightly her knuckles whitened. "For not considering your feelings." "Sienna," I said gently but clearly, "that wasn't a failure to consider. It was a choice." She swallowed, her shoulders drooping slightly. "I just wanted everything to be perfect. My parents are here, so many important people. The pressure to keep up appearances is huge. I didn't want anyone to judge us." "Judge you for what?" I asked. "For you not belonging to our world." Each word hit like cold wind straight from the sea, but I didn't shake. I'd heard worse in my life, and I had already risen from the last row. Sienna, I said, your world may be glamorous, it may be expensive, but real worth isn't in the price of a gown or a four-course dinner. Worth is in how you treat people, especially family. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I continued. Until you understand that, all the perfection you defend is just thin paper. A gust of wind lifted the hem of her dress. I didn't say another word. I walked away. Elias stood near the entrance to the dining area, the golden lights resting on his silver hair like moonlight edging the waves. As I approached, he tilted his head. Everything all right? I answered softly, yes. Nothing they say can make me smaller anymore. Elias smiled, slow and deep. Clara, you were never small. They just tried to shrink you. We stepped into the banquet hall. The sound of utensils chiming blended with jazz drifting from a small stage. Some guests looked at us and whispered, but this time I felt no sting, only ease. I chose a seat beside Elias, without waiting for anyone to offer it. Andrew looked at me for a long moment, then turned to Sienna, as if torn between the old version of his mother and the new one standing before him. But in his eyes, at last, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Respect. The dinner began. I sat there, watching the waves crash beyond the glass, and felt like someone who had just stepped out of a decade locked in a dark room. And right then, when I thought the day had already held enough surprises, I heard Elias lean close, his voice low as the night tide. Clara, there's something I want to tell you, but only when you're ready. I turned to him, ready for what? I didn't know, but I did know one thing. Today's story was only just beginning. The sound of the dinner reception hummed around me like a thin layer of waves brushing against rock. Glasses caught and scattered the light from the chandeliers. The elegant room of the seaside estate on San Juan seemed to glow with a kind of warmth that was also distance, a light that didn't quite belong to people from my world. I sat in the midst of clinking silverware, polite laughter, and soft jazz. But inside, I was as still as the sea before a storm. Elias sat beside me, the warm light settling on his silver hair, making him look like he belonged to this room, and yet somehow completely apart from it. I couldn't stop thinking about what he had said just moments before. Clara, there's something I want to tell you, but only when you're ready. I swallowed, trying to keep my breath from shaking. Go ahead, I whispered. Elias set his fork down and looked straight at me through the dim light. His eyes were as deep as a winter inlet. Clara, today isn't just the day I ran into you again, and it isn't an accident that I came to this wedding. I froze. He tilted his head slightly, his voice lower now. I'm here because I've been looking for you. My mouth opened, but no sound came. And, he continued, I'm here because I know who was behind putting you in the very last row. My heartbeat stumbled. A gust from the sea rattled the window and made the curtains tremble. I watched his face, waiting for the answer. He exhaled softly. It wasn't just Sienna. And it wasn't just the staff. My hands twisted together in my lap. Andrew, Elias said slowly, knew about it. A cold line ran down my spine. I mean, before the ceremony started, Andrew already knew you were going to be moved to row 12. The whole world seemed to pause for a moment. The music, the clatter of plates, the breath of the guests, everything. I stared down at my plate without really seeing it. No, I said, my voice catching. Andrew isn't that kind of person. Elias laid his hand over mine, just the slightest touch, but enough to send a tremor through my chest. Clara, I know this is hard to hear, but truth doesn't stop being true just because it hurts. I wanted to stand. I wanted to walk out of that room, but my feet felt tied to the floor by something invisible. Elias went on. I'm not telling you this to hurt you more. I'm telling you because I think you deserve to know exactly why you had to stand up from that last row. My eyes lifted slowly. How do you know? I asked. Elias leaned back, his gaze never leaving mine. I overheard the staff. he said. I watched Andrew's face when they suggested moving you to row 12. There's a way someone looks when they're fighting for you. And there's a different look when someone knows and chooses silence. I closed my eyes for a moment, reaching for any excuse to believe he had misunderstood. But deep down I knew. Elias Stone was not the kind of man who misread things, especially people. Andrew wasn't cruel, but he had been weak. He had been silent. And sometimes, the one who stays silent at the most important moment hurts more than the one who says the cruel thing aloud. My chest tightened. I took a deep breath, the way I used to before walking into a difficult classroom. Elias, I whispered, what do you want me to do with this truth? He gave a small, sad smile, the kind reserved for things that feel a little too late. Nothing, he said. I just don't want you carrying all the blame on your own shoulders. Just then, the microphone crackled to life. Someone was proposing a toast. A spotlight swept across the room to a small stage where Richard Caldwell Sienna's father stepped up holding a glass of red wine, wearing the perfectly polished smile of a man you can never fully read. I want to thank all of you for being here tonight, he said, voice smooth and practiced. And a special thanks to the Monroe family for agreeing to join our two families together. Several heads turned toward me. Elias leaned closer, his voice low. Do you want to get some air? I nodded. We rose to our feet amid the sound of polite applause. A few people watched us go, not with disdain this time, but curiosity. I heard the murmurs. Who's that man with her? She looks different than she did this afternoon. They look like they've known each other for years. I didn't look back. I followed Elias out to the wide balcony along the side of the building. The sea air hit my face, sharp, cold, real. Salt, seaweed, damp wood. It all wrapped around me like a reminder that I was still alive. I'm sorry if I hurt you, Elias said, leaning an elbow on the stone railing. But I've learned that people only get stronger when they look straight at the cut. I rested my hands on the rail. Thank you, I said. He turned, eyebrows lifting slightly in surprise. Why? Because if no one said it out loud, I'd probably go on believing I deserved that last row seat. A small smile tugged at his mouth, like he'd just heard exactly what he'd hoped to hear. We stood in silence for a long moment, watching the black water shift as the moon began to lift itself into the sky. After a while, I asked, Elias, did you really come here because of me? Honestly? He looked at me, the moonlight pooling in his eyes. Clara, he said slowly, I've spent half my life waiting for a chance to stand beside you one more time. My breath hitched, my hands trembled. But, he added, I don't want to be someone who complicates your life. I only want you to know this. You have someone on your side, no matter what. I turned away because tears had gathered just beneath my eyelids and I didn't want him to see. I had once believed that at this age, my heart would grow quiet. That tenderness had an expiration date. But Elias Stone hadn't just come back. He'd come back on the very day I stood up from the lowest place in my life. After a while, he asked, Clara, would you like to leave this reception? Go up to the North Beach instead, where the white lilies grow wild with the wind. I glanced back through the glass doors at the room behind us. Laughter, wine, shimmering dresses, and all those opinions wrapped in silk. And I knew my answer. Yes, I said, I would. Elias smiled. Then let's go. We walked toward the far end of the balcony, where the golden light faded into a softer haze across the wooden boards. But just as we reached the stairs that led down toward the shoreline, a voice called out from behind us. Mom! I turned. Andrew stood there. His eyes weren't dodging mine anymore. They were scared. Mom, he said, his voice tight. There's something I need to tell you. Something important. I stayed where I was. Elias looked at me, as if to ask, do you want to hear this? I drew in a long breath, the smell of salt and wind and things about to change. All right, I said, go ahead, Andrew. And as my son opened his mouth to speak, I understood that this night was far from over. Andrew stood beneath the golden lanterns lining the balcony, his face pale as though someone had drained the blood straight from his veins. The ocean wind whipped at the cuffs of his suit jacket, and the shadows beneath his eyes looked like the dark outline of a man caught between guilt and a wordless panic. I didn't speak. I just looked at him. Elias stood half a step behind me, far enough not to intrude, close enough that I didn't feel alone. Andrew swallowed hard, then rushed out his words, as if retreat was no longer possible. Mom, I need to explain. About the seating. A chill slid down my spine. Andrew, I said softly, I'm listening. He clenched his hands together, the knuckles turning white under the dim amber light. Mom, I didn't exactly want you in the last row. I didn't want to make things difficult with Sienna. She's planned this wedding for a year. Everything had to be perfect. Perfect? I asked quietly. Andrew nodded, but the nod looked like it fell out of a throat full of shame. Sienna said, you didn't fit the image of the Caldwell family. She was afraid people would talk. I stayed still, no anger, just stillness. A stillness made of years. Andrew continued. I know I should have said something. I know. His voice cracked mid-sentence. But I was scared. Scared Sienna would be upset. Scared the wedding would fall apart. Scared people would look at you differently. I looked straight at him. Differently? My voice sounded like waves tapping stone. Andrew, they did look at me differently. Row 12 was the clearest look of all. Andrew bit his lip until it bled. Mom, I'm sorry. Elias stayed quiet, his presence the only reason my hands didn't tremble. I breathed out slowly. Andrew, do you know what I thought when I sat down in row 12? He shook his head, eyes red. I paused, feeling my heart tighten, that I would sit there for the rest of my life, not just at this wedding. Andrew blinked rapidly, but tears spilled anyway. Mom, You stayed silent, I said, soft but unmistakable. And sometimes silence hurts more than cruelty. Andrew wiped his face clumsily, like a child. He looked around, as if afraid someone might hear this conversation. Mom, I'm not a bad person. I'm just not strong enough. I nodded, a sad, knowing nod. I know, I said. And that's the truth you needed to say. Not so I would forgive you, but so you could see yourself clearly. The wind grew stronger. From inside the dining hall came the sound of laughter, bright, glittering, weightless, like it belonged to a world I had never lived in and never would. Andrew bowed his head. In that moment, he looked like a man lost inside his own life. Mom. He looked up again, voice so small I had to lean in to hear it. I'm not just weak. I'm also in debt. I'm drowning in it. My body went cold. What debt? The Caldwell Company, Andrew said, sounding broken. The Seattle waterfront project they've been bragging about all year. It's actually collapsing. They've been hiding it, and I've been forced to sign for part of it. I stared at my son, the way someone might look at a sinking ship that's still trying to smile on deck. Andrew, how long have you been involved? 2 years, he swallowed. Since I started dating Sienna. Her father promised to help me rise. I closed my eyes. Years of motherhood had taught me this. Some mistakes children make come from wanting to stand somewhere they were never meant to stand. I sighed. You're telling me this because you want my sympathy, or because you want me to save you? Andrew opened his mouth, but didn't get the chance to answer. A woman's voice sliced through the air like a sharp blade. Andrew! Sienna stood in the doorway, her eyes glassy and sharp like shattered crystal. She strode toward us and grabbed Andrew's sleeve. What are you doing out here? Leaving the reception? Making people stare? Andrew pulled his arm back, a movement I'd never seen from him since he'd met her. I'm talking to my mother. Sienna narrowed her eyes at Elias, then at me. I know exactly who Elias Stone is, she said, voice clipped like an instruction. And I don't want him interfering in my family affairs. Elias looked at her the way a grown man looks at a tantruming child without anger, just cold distance. Your family affairs? Elias replied. Last I checked, she is Andrew's mother, not an employee of the Caldwell Empire. Sienna froze for a beat. She straightened, lifted her chin, and squared her shoulders like someone trying to stand inside borrowed power. Clara, she said to me, voice sweet as syrup but thick with calculation. I'd like to speak with you privately, without outsiders. I'm not going anywhere, I replied, my voice low but solid as stone. If you have something to say it here. She inhaled sharply, then dropped the sweetness entirely. Fine, then I'll be direct. Her eyes sharpened like needles. Clara, you need to understand your place. The Caldwell and Monroe families are entering a major alliance. An alliance built on image. You cannot jeopardize that. Elias raised a brow, a dangerous smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. Sienna pressed on, not letting anyone interrupt. And ever since Elias Stone appeared beside you, the media team has been asking questions about your past with him. This puts Andrew's entire career at risk. I stood still. Sienna stepped closer. You need to stop. Stop being seen with Elias Stone. Stop disrupting the structure we've built. That last sentence landed like a blow. But the surprise wasn't the pain, it was Elias's voice. He stepped forward, standing right beside me. Sienna Caldwell, he said, his voice very low. I think you're forgetting something important. Sienna's jaw tightened. And what is that? Elias looked her straight in the eye. Clara Monroe is not a pawn in anyone's structure. You have no right to ask her to shrink so your family can stand taller. The air went still. I could feel the wave coming. Elias continued. And one more thing. He spoke softly, but every word fell like a stone dropped in deep water. The Caldwell family is no longer in any position to demand anything. Sienna stared. What do you mean? Elias tilted his head, smiling a blade-thin smile. Do you really think the waterfront project is going to stay afloat much longer? Andrew and Sienna froze, and I realized Elias knew the secret Andrew had barely begun to tell me, and he knew more than Andrew did. The ocean wind surged, the moon climbed higher, and I understood. That last row seat they tried to put me in was only the beginning of a much bigger reversal. Sienna stood frozen under the faint moonlight of San Juan Island, the glossy confidence she'd worn all day starting to crack like paint eaten away by salt water. Andrew stood stiff beside her, his eyes wide the moment he heard Elias mention the waterfront project. The wind off the shoreline cut through the three of us cold, sharp, like a knife slicing down the middle. I stood between them, watching two young people cling to a world they didn't truly understand. Beside me, Elias stood like a breakwater, stone silent but solid, as if he'd been bracing for this exact moment for a very long time. Sienna was the first one to break the silence. Are you threatening us? She asked. Her voice was no longer steel, more like glass about to crack. Elias tilted his head, that faint, familiar smile touching his lips, the smile I remembered from when we were young, when he knew he held the truth and everyone else only held an illusion. I'm only stating what you're going to have to face sooner or later, he replied. Waterfront is drowning in debt, and Caldwell Real Estate is hiding it like a rip current under calm water. Sienna drew in a harsh breath, gripping Andrew's arm like a person trying not to slip off a wet rock. You think you know everything? She scoffed, the sound somewhere between arrogance and fear. You think you get to interfere in our business just because you used to know Andrew's mother? Elias didn't react to her tone. He only looked at her, calm, in a way that made everyone else uneasy. I'm speaking because I have a reason, Elias said, and because if Clara is dragged into a crisis that isn't hers, I'm not going to let that happen. I turned to him, my eyes widening just a little. That wasn't just protection, it was a declaration. Andrew swallowed, finally finding his own voice. How do you know about Caldwell's finances? Elias looked straight at my son. Because my company, he said, each word landing like a stone on wet rock, is one of the groups negotiating to acquire part of the waterfront project. Sienna's eyes flew wide. She stammered. Which group? Whitmore Capital? Elias just looked at her. No nod, no denial. He didn't need to. Sienna wavered, like a person hit by a wave she never saw coming. I had never seen her look afraid. For her, those words, Whitmore Capital, weren't just the name of a firm. They were a sentence, a storm. I turned to Elias, slowly. You're? Elias smiled. Exactly who you're thinking, Clara. His first name, his last name, Stone, Whitmore Stone. That's when it clicked, the faint memory of a finance article I'd read years ago, mentioning one of the people behind Whitmore Capital, a man who ran one of their investment arms, specializing in buying distressed projects and restructuring them. My breathing slowed, not from awe, from the realization. Elias hadn't just walked back into my life. He had come back with far more than I ever imagined. Andrew's hand shook. So, you knew everything about the Caldwell family before you came here? Elias answered. Andrew, you're not a bad man, but you're standing on the wrong side. I didn't come here to destroy your marriage. I came here for Clara. And because you deserve to know the truth before you go down with Caldwell. Sienna glared at him. You don't get to say that. This is our wedding, our day. Outsiders don't get to. He's my son. My words cut across hers like a blade. Sienna fell silent. Andrew did too. I'm not standing here to watch a fight, I said, with the voice of a mother who spent 40 years teaching calm, but sharp enough to quiet a room. I'm standing here because I was put in the last row, and I want to know why my son didn't stop it. Andrew bowed his head. Mom, I didn't want you down there, but I didn't dare speak against it. Afraid of who? I asked. Andrew answered almost instantly. Sienna. Silence stretched long and tight like a rope about to snap. Sienna turned her face away, but the proud smile she'd worn earlier was gone. I looked at my son. Andrew, I said, my words slow as a rolling wave. A man who fears his wife will always leave his mother in the back row. Andrew covered his face. His shoulders trembled. Below us, the sea roared like it wanted to swallow the entire estate. Elias placed a gentle hand on Andrew's shoulder. You don't have to be strong all at once, Elias said. But you do have to tell the truth. Andrew drew in a shaky breath, and for the first time in years, I saw him truly face me, no dodging, no fog. Mom, he said, voice breaking, I need your help. I've gone too far, and I'm terrified of letting go. I asked, let go of what? Andrew answered, letting go of a luxury life I convinced myself I belonged in. A powerful gust rushed through, ballooning my coat like a sail caught in the wind. Sienna snapped. That's enough, she nearly shouted. I will not let some woman from a lower class destroy everything I've built. Elias turned, his gaze so sharp even the wind seemed to halt. Clara hasn't destroyed anything, he said. You're the one doing that. I only asked her to know her place, Sienna said, her voice shaking with fury. A mother's place, Elias replied, is beside her son, not beneath anyone's feet. Sienna's face flushed red, like the sea reflecting a violent sunset. Then she looked at Andrew, voice cracking. If you stand with her, you'll lose everything. Your career, your status, your ties to the Caldwells. Everything. Andrew held her gaze for a long time. Then he said a single sentence, one I had never heard from his mouth before. If all of that comes at the cost of hurting my mother, then I don't want it. Sienna stumbled back a step, as if Andrew had slapped the highest pride she owned. You'll regret this, she whispered. Maybe, Andrew replied, but tonight, I'm standing on the right side. She turned and walked back into the reception, no glance back. She didn't need to. The storm had already started. Andrew turned to me. Mom, I'm sorry. I lifted my hand to his cheek, just a light touch, but enough to make him tremble. You hurt me, I said, not pretending otherwise. But you also made the right choice, for the first time in a long time. He choked out, Mom, I don't know where to begin. I looked at Elias. Elias nodded once. Begin with the truth, I said. The rest, I'm here. Andrew dropped his head onto my shoulder, like the little boy who used to run to me after every scraped knee. I placed my hand on his back, and in that moment, the sting of row 12 eased a little. Elias watched us, his eyes free of judgment. Only the gaze of a man watching something he'd once lost come back. Slowly, painfully, beautifully. The ocean wind carried the scent of lilies from the garden below. And that's when I knew. The night was far from over. And tomorrow, a lot more would surface. The wind from the water tilted the lanterns hanging along the balcony, making their shadows beat against the wall like birds trying to escape a cage. Andrew stood beside me, his eyes still red but clearer now, a clarity that comes only to someone who has finally spoken words he has held back for years. Elias remained one step behind, like a stone anchored in the churning tide. His presence made me feel I didn't have to fight alone anymore. Even though the battle wasn't between me and anyone, it was between Andrew and the life he'd trapped himself inside. From inside the reception hall, jazz music drifted back into the night air. Glasses clinked, elegant smiles lifted like finely crafted masks. No one inside knew that just beyond the balcony doors, the world of the Caldwells was beginning to tilt like a ship taking its first hard wave. Andrew turned toward me. Mom, there's something else I need to tell you. I looked at my son, not angry, not confused, just waiting. Andrew drew a deep breath, his voice thick. I never wanted you to feel small, but I let myself get swept into their world, and I was afraid people would see that I wasn't like them. Not being like them is a blessing, Andrew, I said softly, but each word steady as stone. I never raised you to be like them. I only wanted you to be someone who knows right, knows wrong, and dares to speak the truth. Andrew lowered his head. Mom, I'm so weak. I placed a hand on his shoulder. You just showed more strength than I've seen in years. Elias smiled faintly beside us, his eyes confirming what I said was true. We stood there for a few quiet seconds until the glass doors burst open again. A few guests stepped onto the balcony, but not to admire the ocean. They looked around, whispering. A man murmured, What's going on? Caldwell just called someone downstairs to check documents. Someone emailed internal files to the press? I looked at Elias. He shifted his gaze to Andrew. Did you share anything about the finances with anyone else? Andrew shook his head quickly. No, I only knew part of it, but someone else inside the company knew. They warned me last week that something big was being covered up. We didn't have time to react before a staff member in formal attire rushed out, his face pale as wax. Mr. Monroe, Miss Caldwell is looking for you. It's urgent. Andrew looked at me, then at Elias. I nodded gently. Go, I said. You need to face it. Andrew left the railing and disappeared back into the reception. That left me and Elias alone in the thick, dark sea wind. I felt something shifting, a larger wind, not of weather but of truth. Elias watched me for a moment, then said, Clara, you need to prepare yourself. Prepare for what? He rested his hand on the stone railing, eyes on the water. When a family starts to collapse, people look for someone to blame, and the easiest person to blame is always the one with the least power in the room. I heard every word. Slow, quiet, true. I didn't answer. After a moment, I asked, Do you think they'll blame Andrew? Or me? Elias turned slightly, looking at me for a long moment. It could be both, but the mother is always the simplest target. I exhaled softly, a long breath belonging to someone who saw this coming long before it arrived. Elias went on, But they won't succeed, not while I'm here. Something warm rose in my chest, not love, not longing, but something bigger. The feeling of finally being protected after years of carrying everything alone. I didn't have time to respond before the doors opened again. It was Rachel Lim. She stepped onto the balcony, her dress swaying in the wind, her expression heavy as though she'd just witnessed something unravel. "Clara," she said, her voice small but shaking. "I think you need to know this." I stepped forward half a pace. "What is it, Rachel?" She glanced at Elias, then nodded. "I think both of you need to hear it." I held my breath. Rachel reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, and opened a news alert. The Seattle Chronicle just published a leak about Caldwell Real Estate's debt crisis. The source is anonymous, but the article says they received internal documents from a member of the groom's family. I heard the sea slam against the rocks, like a hammer coming down. Rachel continued. "And Richard Caldwell is telling guests that the person behind this is the groom's mother." I froze. "He's saying," Rachel swallowed, "a woman who didn't understand what she was doing exposed confidential information and sabotaged our family." The wind whipped my coat hard against my body. Elias straightened, his expression changing cold, sharp, stripped of the gentleness he'd carried earlier. "Clara," he said slowly, "come with me." "Where?" I asked. "Inside," Elias replied, "to the place where they're using you as a shield." I looked into the glowing room, glittering dresses, polished faces, polite laughter, and at the center of it, a spreading accusation, like oil slicking across the surface of the sea. I wasn't afraid anymore, not after what Andrew admitted, not after what Elias said, not after the years I spent swallowing silence. I gripped the railing once, then stood tall. "I was placed in the last row," I said, "but I won't let anyone put me somewhere I don't belong ever again." Elias nodded. Rachel stepped aside. I walked into the reception, music, voices, and murmurs rushing toward me, yet I did not lower my head. I didn't drop my gaze. I didn't shrink. I walked straight toward the stage where Richard Caldwell was speaking, where Sienna stood with her jaw tight, where Andrew looked lost like someone thrown into a storm without warning. And I knew it was time for the turning. Not to fight someone, but to stand for myself. The reception room seemed to freeze when I walked in. Not because I was loud or dramatic, but because I was the exact opposite. I moved past tables draped in white linen, past glasses of wine clinking somewhere in the distance, past glittering dresses catching the light, and everything felt like it slowed, as if someone had turned down the volume on the world. I saw Richard Caldwell standing on the small stage, mic in hand. Beside him was Sienna, her face tight, and a few steps away stood Andrew, pale as chalk. Guests were whispering, their eyes flying toward me like needles.
"And we deeply regret," Richard was saying, his voice loud and clear, "that confidential internal information was leaked on the very day of my daughter's wedding."
I stopped in the middle of the room. Richard continued, speaking slowly but sharply, like a line he'd practiced.
"These documents, as reported in the press, came from a member of the groom's family."
Someone who may not fully grasp the delicate nature of business. I heard a few guests hold their breath. Richard's gaze swept across the crowd and landed exactly where I stood, in the center of the bright golden room. "And regrettably," he said, enunciating every word, "that person is the groom's mother." The room exploded into murmurs. I stood tall, back straight, eyes steady. I didn't look at Richard. I looked at Andrew. My son had gone rigid, his mouth opening as if to speak, but no sound coming out. Sienna's hand was clamped around his arm, as though she could steer the narrative with her grip alone. Elias stepped up beside me, slow, steady, quiet as an advancing tide about to hit rock. I took a small breath and started walking toward the stage, not hurried, not shaking, not bowing. The whispers moved with me like waves breaking along stone. Was it really her? She leaked it? My God, who does that at their own child's wedding? Elias walked with me, his presence like a long shadow shielding my back. When I reached the foot of the stage, Richard was still speaking. "Of course, we hope this woman did not do it intentionally." I didn't. My words cut through the microphone like a blade through water. The room fell silent. Richard looked at me, and for the first time I saw a flicker of confusion cross his eyes. "Mrs. Monroe," he said, raising his voice, "this is a serious matter. The information the press obtained." "I heard you," I replied, my tone calm but clear enough that no one could pretend they missed it. "And I'm saying it again, I didn't do it." Sienna stepped forward half a pace, her lips curving into a half smile, the kind of expression people wear when they think they're holding a weapon. "Mrs. Clara," she said, "there's no need to deny it. Someone in Andrew's family already said you were upset about the seating, and that you might have said too much to the staff." I looked at her.
Really looked. Long enough for her to squirm.
"You're telling me," I said slowly, "that I discussed your family's financials with the catering staff?" A small laugh slipped out from somewhere in the room, quickly smothered. Sienna's face flushed red, her lips twitching. Richard cut in. "According to the article, the leak came from an internal email. Someone gained access, and you think I know how to get into Caldwell Real Estate's internal email system?" I asked. This time, more than one person couldn't quite contain a soft chuckle. The corner of Richard's eye twitched, a man used to giving orders, not to being questioned. I stepped up one stair toward the stage. Andrew moved toward me on instinct. Elias stayed below, but his eyes were on me like a lighthouse beam. I turned to my son. "Andrew," I said, "look at me and say it. Do you think your mother knows how to hack an email server?" Andrew didn't laugh. He didn't deflect. He just looked at me with an expression full of hurt. "No, Mom," he said finally, his voice breaking. "I know you don't." I faced Richard again. "So what exactly is your accusation based on?" Richard's gaze flicked toward Sienna, and in that slip, I saw the truth. He was scrambling to build a story fast enough to patch a hole in his ship, not because he truly believed I caused it. A man who stands in the middle of financial power but trembles in front of the truth. That was Richard Caldwell. I said, "You're a businessman, Mr. Caldwell, so I assume you understand that accusations require proof?" Richard cleared his throat. "We have reasons to believe." Reasons or feelings? The room tightened around the words. Elias moved a little closer to the stage. His stance wasn't aggressive, but there was something in the way he simply stood that made people instinctively step aside. I went on. "If you have evidence, show it. If you don't use me to cover a much bigger hole in your company." A soft "oh" floated up from somewhere in the back. Richard's face darkened. Sienna rushed to patch the moment. "Mrs. Clara, no one is saying you meant harm, but you need to understand that your actions can be damaging." I turned to her. "You're trying very hard to convince everyone that I'm the problem." "Because you are," Sienna blurted. I met her panicked eyes and said the one thing that froze her in place. "Sienna, the thing you're running from is this. It's your family that's sinking, not me." The room nearly shattered. Conversations burst open like glass hitting the floor. Elias lifted his head and his voice rolled out like surf. "If we're going to be honest," he said, "I can tell everyone in this room exactly how deep Caldwell Real Estate is in debt." The reception hall went silent. Richard swung toward Elias. You have no right." "I do," Elias replied, "because my firm is the one currently negotiating to salvage the project you've allowed to drown in red ink." I watched the color drain from Richard's face, red to gray. Elias took a single step forward, not much, but enough to make the whole stage feel heavier. "And I can also confirm who actually leaked those documents to the press," Elias said, his eyes fixed on Richard, not bothering to look at anyone else. "And I can assure you, it wasn't Clara Monroe." I filled my lungs, the air in the room suddenly hot and thin. The space felt strung tight with an invisible wire. The sea wind slammed into the glass outside. Richard's shoulders trembled. Sienna clutched the fabric of her dress, her breath shallow. Andrew looked at me, like a man seeing his mother stand taller than anyone else in the room. Elias continued, voice low but final. "But if you still want to make her your scapegoat, just because she's the easier target." He turned toward me. "Then you should know this. She's not standing alone anymore." The silence pressed down on the wood floor, and I, the woman they'd shoved into the last row, stood in the center of that glittering room, not bowing, not asking permission, not shaking. I said just one thing. I will not stay quiet when I'm blamed for something I didn't do. I'm not here to prop up anyone's image, and I am absolutely done being silent. The room went dead still. Then, a single clap. Rachel Lim. Then another. And another from a few older guests. Then a few more. Not a roar, but enough. Enough to drain the color from Richard Caldwell's face. Enough to make Sienna's hand fall away from Andrew's arm. Enough for me to understand. The turning had begun. The reception hall went completely silent after those scattered claps, as if someone had squeezed the heart of the entire room with an invisible fist. Outside, the waves hit the rocks, the sound echoing through the empty spaces inside the gleaming hall. Richard Caldwell remained on stage, gripping the microphone so tightly his knuckles turned white. Sienna stood beside him, her face hardening, every polished feature of a privileged daughter cracking in tiny, splintering lines. And Andrew, my son, stood between two worlds, one half trembling at the thought of people seeing the collapse of the Caldwell image, the other half looking toward me, the mother he had finally chosen to stand with. Elias stepped closer beside me, a single slow stride steady, like a rock that never sinks. Richard was the one to break the silence. "Mr. Stone," Richard said, trying to hold his voice steady but sounding like someone whose throat had been sliced. "I don't understand what gives you the right to interfere with my family's internal affairs." Elias didn't answer. He just looked at Richard with the eyes of a man who has stood in the rooms where power actually lives and can spot counterfeit authority from across an ocean. I knew that look. It was the same one he had at 18, standing beside the Bainbridge ferry, saying he would become the man who changed his own life. And he did, in a way no one could have predicted. Elias took another step and stepped fully onto the stage, standing level with Richard. "Mr. Caldwell," he said slowly, "if you want to talk about rights, then let's talk business rights first." Richard swallowed hard enough for the room to hear it. Elias continued, "You are drowning in debt." Whispers burst like bubbles breaking the surface. Elias didn't stop. "You've been hiding that debt for 3 fiscal quarters. You siphoned money from the waterfront project to cover ongoing commercial losses." Richard threw a hand up. "You have no proof." Elias reached into his pocket, took out his phone, not unlocking it, just holding it. "I do," he said, "and I'm not the only one." An older guest whispered, "My God, that's why the press had the documents?" Elias turned to the crowd, his voice low, not loud, but clear enough to slice through every layer of noise. The leak did not come from Clara. It did not come from anyone connected to the Monroe family. Richard's eyes darted wildly. Elias raised the phone slightly, like a lantern revealing the inside of a cave. It came from someone inside the Caldwell family. The room stopped breathing. Sienna stepped back half a pace, her face going pale. Richard almost shouted, "That is slander, absolute. It was your wife." The room died. No murmurs, no clinking cutlery, no music. Everything stopped like the ocean had stopped moving. Sienna's voice cracked. "Who did you say?" Elias spoke like the tide at night. "Margot Caldwell." She sent the documents. She contacted the press. She tried to protect Sienna's inheritance before the entire Caldwell empire collapsed. Richard spun toward the tables, looking for his wife. She was gone. He looked around like a man realizing his ship had been drilled open by someone standing at the helm. A woman near a table whispered, "I saw Mrs. Margot leave about 10 minutes ago." Elias continued, without a flicker of pity. "She did it to buy time, hoping you could cover the hole. But the story is already out. The press knows. And now, everyone in this room knows." Sienna swayed, almost losing her footing. No, my mother would never." Elias cut her off. "You think she didn't know Richard transferred assets into other names? You think she didn't understand that this could trigger investigation?" Richard barked. "That is internal business. You have no right." "I do," Elias said, eyes sharp as metal.
Because Whitmore Stone is the entity negotiating to acquire your failing project, and when Margot sent the files to the press, he paused. She sent a copy to me. Sienna covered her mouth. Several guests put hands to their chests. The room drowned in a truth as deep as the sea. I looked at Richard Caldwell, the man who had tried to place blame on me to save the fragile eggshell of his reputation, and I did not feel triumph. I felt a calmness wash over me, the kind that comes when you see the ocean after a storm. I said, "Mr. Caldwell, you used me to cover what you could not control." Richard didn't look at me. He was breathing like a man slipping underwater.
"You should apologize to me," I continued, softly, not loud, but every word landing with a weight he could not dodge. "But I don't need your apology." The room held still. I said the last line. "I only need the truth to stand where it belongs." Elias stepped beside me, not touching, just close enough that I felt his warmth. He spoke to Richard. "From this point forward, you will deal directly with Whitmore Stone. All agreements with your partners will require full transparency." Richard lifted his head, eyes red. "What do you want?" Elias replied, "I want you to stop blaming the only woman who has never done anything wrong to this family." The room felt struck by lightning. Andrew stepped forward, standing between me and Richard. He looked straight into the face of the man who would be his father-in-law and said, "You will not speak about my mother that way again." His voice shook, but with the tremor of someone standing upright, not bowing anymore. Richard stared at him like a man betrayed. Sienna looked at me, but this time there was no disdain, only fear. The kind that comes when the ground disappears under your feet. The jazz music flicked back on in the speakers, but no one heard it. No one talked. No one moved. Elias touched my arm gently at the elbow. "Clara," he said, "let's go." I nodded. We walked through the room washed in golden light, but I no longer found that light beautiful or intimidating. It was just light. And I had stepped out of the shadows a long time ago. The wind from Elliott Bay slipped into the grand foyer as Elias, Andrew, and I stepped outside. The glass doors slid shut behind us, sealing in the crackling whispers of the reception like a fire just catching on linen. We hadn't gone 10 steps before the sharp rhythm of high heels struck the stone behind us. "Clara!" The woman's voice cut clean through the night. I turned. There on the stone steps stood Margot Caldwell. The flawless makeup was gone. So was the hovering, effortless authority she'd worn like a coat all evening. Her hair was slightly undone, her lips trembling, her eyes red-rimmed but not broken. She didn't look like the wife of Richard Caldwell anymore. She looked like a woman who had just broken the lock on the cage she'd lived in for decades. Richard hurried after her, barking, "Margot, don't say another word." She spun around, her voice hard as forged steel. "You've said more than enough, Richard." With just those few words, the chatter on the steps died. The little clusters of guests froze. For a moment, the Seattle night seemed to hold its breath, leaving only the sound of small waves tapping against the edge of the bay. Margot turned her eyes to me. "Clara, I want to apologize." I stood still, not out of anger or satisfaction, but because there was something strange in her voice, something real. Elias stepped back a little, leaving space between the two of us. Margot drew in a shaky breath, her voice breaking bit by bit. "I've watched you for a long time. Since the first night Andrew brought you to a Caldwell dinner. I knew from that moment, you didn't belong in our world. And I was afraid. Afraid of what it said about me, that someone like you could raise a son like Andrew. And all my years in this cold stone house never made my daughter half that kind." She stopped, her gaze shimmering like the surface of a mountain lake about to overflow. For the first time, I didn't see her as the mother-in-law from the other side. I saw her as a woman who'd been squeezed into a shape that never really fit. Margot continued, "I told Sienna you weren't good enough. I watched them treat you badly. I didn't stop it. Because I thought, if you disappeared, everything in this family would be easier. Pain from an entire life spilled out in front of strangers, not to beg for sympathy, but like someone finally learning how to breathe. I inhaled slowly." "And then?" I asked. Margot lowered her eyes, then lifted them again. And then I watched Richard preparing to sink everything: money, status, image. All of it was more important than us, than our daughter, than himself. Richard stepped forward, grabbing her arm. "Margot, stop embarrassing me." "Let go of me." Her tone was ice. He released her immediately, not out of respect, but because for the first time he realized she wasn't afraid of him anymore. Elias tilted his head slightly, observing. Andrew stood close to me, his hand resting lightly at my elbow. Margot went on. "I sent the documents out. I contacted the press, and I sent a copy to Mr. Stone." She turned to Elias and gave him a small, formal nod of thanks. "Because I needed someone strong enough to hold Richard back when he tried to drag the whole family under with him." Richard's voice cracked as he shouted, "You're insane!" Margot looked right at him. "No, I just woke up before you did." The air was so cold it felt like you could hear hearts beating. Then she took a step toward me. "I am sorry for everything I stood by and watched them do to you," she said. "For staying silent, for convincing myself that if you were gone, my daughter's life would be easier." Her breath shook. "But my daughter, Sienna, is paying the highest price for the lies I taught her to live by." Andrew's grip on my arm tightened when he heard her name. I asked quietly, "Why tell the truth tonight?" Margot wiped her tears with a small, unsteady motion. "Because I don't want my daughter to live the way I did, in a house where women are decorations to make men's power look prettier." She lifted her head and looked me straight in the eye. "Because I want Sienna free from the shadow I cast over her. And because I owe you the truth." My chest felt lighter. Not forgiven, not healed, just clearer. "I accept your apology," I said softly. "But forgiveness will take time." Margot nodded. The tears slid quietly down. "If you give me the chance," she whispered, "that's already more than I deserve." Andrew stepped forward. "Mrs. Margot, what about Sienna?" Margot looked toward the doorway of the hall, where Sienna stood frozen in the frame of golden light, shoulders slumped. "Tonight, every layer of glass that protected her shattered," Margot said. "She's going to hurt. She's going to fall apart. But maybe that's the only thing that will make her really look at herself." She took a deep breath and added, almost in confession, "She became who she is, largely because of me." Nobody answered. The wind cut across the steps, carrying the salt and cold of the bay. Then a low male voice broke the silence. Elias. "Tonight," he said quietly, "no one really wins. No one really loses. The only thing that happened is the truth finally standing where it belongs." Margot looked at him. "Thank you," she said, "for not letting it go any further than it already has." Elias nodded, the kind of nod a man gives when he once lost a love 50 years ago, and this time chooses not to step back. As people slowly drifted away, Andrew turned to me. "Mom, are you okay?" I looked out toward the black water of the bay. "I am," I said, "because tonight wasn't about them pushing me under anymore." Andrew pressed his lips together, his eyes red but clear. "I'm proud of you, Mom." I touched his hand lightly. "And I'm proud of you for finally standing up." Before we left, Margot turned back once more, standing alone in the wash of golden light spilling from the awning. "Clara," she said, her voice no longer shaking, "if there's ever a day you're willing, I'd like to talk again. Not as in-laws, just as two women who finally see each other clearly." I gave a small nod. She turned and walked away. Her figure looked small but straight, pushing against the sideways wind off the water. Elias opened the car door for me. "Clara," he said softly, "tonight you were stronger than the storm." I looked at him, at those sea-colored eyes that somehow hadn't changed in all these years. "No," I replied, "I just stopped being afraid." Elias smiled, that quiet, steady smile. That's where real strength starts. As the car rolled out of the parking lot, the lights of the reception reflected on the window beside me like fading stars. Inside my chest, there was no darkness left, just a new question quietly opening. Where does tomorrow want to take me now? The next morning, Seattle was covered in a thin veil of mist like a bride's forgotten veil draped across the surface of the water. I made tea and sat quietly watching the steam rise, feeling a lightness inside that wasn't triumph and wasn't vindication, just the sense that I had finally laid the first stone back into the foundation of my life. My phone rang. Elias. Clara. His voice was low and warm. There's something I want you to be part of today, 3 o'clock. Whitmore Stone Tower, conference room on the 28th floor. Do I need to prepare anything? I asked. Just come, he replied. The rest will make sense when you're there. The Whitmore Stone Tower was so tall that the low clouds brushed across its middle floors. When I walked into the lobby, people greeted Elias with familiarity, yet still with respect. He came down himself to meet me, offering a gentle smile. Come, he said, placing his hand lightly at my back, just enough to make me feel I wasn't walking into an unfamiliar world. The 28th floor conference room glowed with the muted Seattle light. A woman stood when we entered, small-framed, dark hair pinned neatly, a soft gray wool scarf around her neck. I'm Rachel Lim, counsel for Whitmore Stone, she said, offering her hand. It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Mrs. Monroe. Mr. Stone has spoken about you. I felt my cheeks warm. Elias cleared his throat softly, smoothing the moment. Rachel opened her laptop. On the screen was a long contract, sections highlighted in red, blue, and gold. I wanted you to hear this directly, Rachel said. The Waterfront Bay project can only continue if the Caldwells accept an ethical compliance package. And you are the person we want listed as community co-signatory. I forgot to breathe. Me? I whispered. Yes. Elias sat beside me, his eyes gentle. You endured what they imposed. Your presence is proof that those they tried to push to the back still have a voice. Rachel continued. The package has 4 key terms: a public apology on the Caldwell homepage and in 3 local papers, a dignity of elder clause applied across all Caldwell residential operations, annual contributions to the Seattle Elder Support Fund, and the creation of the Henry Monroe Reading Corner, a free children's reading space at the Beacon Hill Library, named after your husband. I stared at the screen. Henry's name was printed in bold, blue-centered, steady, beautiful enough to make my eyes burn. Elias placed his hand on the table, his voice low. Clara, Henry deserves to be remembered, and you deserve for your names to stand together on something that lasts. I lowered my head, swallowing the tremor in my breath. Rachel slid the pen across. You only need to sign here to register as co-approver. I picked up the pen. My hand trembled, not from fear, but because for the first time in my life, I realized my voice was strong enough to live in ink. I signed, just like that. And yet it felt like I had loosened the knot that had held me for half a lifetime. 3 days later, Andrew called, his voice unsure, like the little boy who once feared being scolded for breaking a vase. Mom, I want to invite you to dinner. Not a gathering, not friends, just family. Family, I repeated softly. Yes, he said, and I prepared everything the way you deserve. That evening, I went to Andrew's home on Mercer Island. The house that used to be loud, glittering, and overflowing with Sienna's parties was now quiet, warm, smelling of roasted chicken. When I stepped into the dining room, I stopped in my tracks. The long table sat in the center of the room, and my chair was placed at the center of it. Not at the end, not against the wall, not behind anyone. The center right where the light fell warmest, where anyone speaking would look directly at me. On the back of the chair was a sprig of lavender. Henry used to grow lavender in our backyard. I turned to Andrew. His eyes were wet. I want you to know, he said, from today on, you will never sit at the back again. Not in this house, not in my life. All I could say was, thank you, Andrew. We ate dinner, no tension, no sharp looks. No corrections, no humiliation. Just the soft clink of cutlery and a few small laughs, still tentative but real. When he walked me to the door, Andrew asked, "Mom, now that your life is different, what do you want next?" I smiled, not answering yet, because right then my phone buzzed. A message from Elias. "Next month I'll be in Tuscany overseeing a project. If you want, I have a place beside me. Just say yes and I'll arrange everything." I looked out over the lake glittering with Seattle lights. Inside me echoed my words from the night before. "It's not that I became strong. I just stopped being afraid." I replied, "I'll go." Elias answered with only 2 words. I knew. That night, back home, I opened the drawer and took out Henry's old gardening journal. Between the yellowing pages I wrote, "I sat in the back row for too long." But today, I stepped forward, not because someone pulled me up, but because I stood. Outside, the sea wind brushed the last dry stems of flowers on the porch. The sound felt like Henry's voice, warm, steady, quiet. Tuscany is waiting. A reading corner in his name is about to open. The chair at the center of the table has been placed, and I, Clara Monroe, have finally stepped out of the back row of my own life. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. If you've ever been pushed to the back row because someone decided you weren't worthy, tell me where you're watching from. Share your story in the comments. Someone out there might need your words to stand up again. If this journey touched something in you, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell. Not for me, but for everyone who needs to know, no matter your age, you can still rewrite your life. See you in the next story.